The silence in the penthouse office was a living thing, a predator that stalked a space between the floor-to-ceiling windows and the cold marble desk. It coiled around Minjun Kwan, tightening its grip with every tick of the obscenely expensive clock on the wall. He stared at the photograph on his phone, the screen a lone point of light in the deepening twilight. Her, Zara. Her smile in the picture was a memory of sunlight in a life that had become a permanent eclipse. It was a candid shot he had taken one afternoon in the park, her head thrown back in a laugh at something foolish he'd said. The image was a punch to the gut, a fresh wound every time he looked at it. 6 months, 184 days of this hollowed-out existence. He was a king ruling over an empire of ghosts, his throne cold, his crown a weight of lead. The city glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of indifferent stars, but he saw none of it. He only saw her face, swam in the memory of her eyes, and drowned. The door opened with a soft electronic hiss. Cheho stepped inside, his movements precise and silent, a shadow given form. He did not need to speak for Minjun to know the news was bad. It was etched in the tight line of his jaw, the grim set of his shoulders. They made their move, Cheho said, his voice a low rumble that did nothing to disturb the oppressive quiet. The docks. It was your uncle. Minjun didn't look up from the phone. His thumb traced the curve of Zara's cheek on the screen. He had built this empire, solidified it from the crumbling legacy his father had left him. He had been ruthless, decisive, a creature of power and control. But for what? This sterile room? This empty life? The power he wielded felt like ash in his mouth. He thinks I am weak now, Minjun stated. It wasn't a question. He mistakes grief for weakness, Cheho corrected softly. Finally, Minjun looked up. His eyes, usually chips of obsidian, were dull, cavernous. And is he wrong? He asked, the question raw, stripped of all artifice. Was this not weakness? To let the absence of one woman dismantle the man he had been? To feel her departure like a physical amputation, a phantom limb that ached with a pain no medicine could touch? Cheho's expression didn't flicker. He is a fool, but a dangerous one. Minjun set the phone down, placing it face down on the desk, as if the light from her smile was too much to bear. The predator of silence slithered back, and this time he welcomed it. It was a familiar pain, a penance. He had let her go. He had watched the only good, pure thing in his life walk away because his world was poison and he had been its king. His uncle was making a move on his empire. Let him. Let it all burn. It was all worthless without her. The rain wasn't just falling. It was attacking the city. It hammered against the windshield of Zara Adebayo's ancient Toyota, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. She was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that settled deep in your marrow and made your thoughts slow and syrupy. A 16-hour double shift at the hospital, and all she could think about was crawling into bed. That and the bill from her mother's specialist that sat on her kitchen counter, a crisp white rectangle of dread. She hated this feeling, the constant grinding anxiety of living on the knife's edge of financial ruin. She was a nurse. She saved lives, comforted the dying, held the hands of the grieving. She gave everything she had, and in return, the world gave her just enough to survive, but never enough to breathe. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. She pressed the brake, but her worn tires met a slick of oil and water on the asphalt. The car didn't slow. It skidded, a slow, sickening hydroplane that felt both instantaneous and eternal. Time stretched and warped. She saw the car in front of her, a long, black, impossibly clean sedan that looked like it cost more than her entire nursing school education. No, 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 no! The impact was less a crash and more a dull, metallic thud, a gentle kiss of death for her bank account. her seatbelt bit into her shoulder and her head snapped forward, a flash of white light exploding behind her eyes. The world settled back into focus with the relentless drumming of the rain and the frantic thumping of her own heart. For a moment, she just sat there, encased in the ticking silence of her stalled engine. This couldn't be happening. Of all the cars in the city to hit, she had to hit this one. A car that probably had a chauffeur and a legal team on retainer. She could already feel the phantom weight of a lawsuit settling on her shoulders. Another impossible bill to add to the pile. Taking a shaky breath, she pushed her door open and stepped out into the sheeting rain. The water soaked through her thin scrubs in seconds, plastering the cheap fabric to her skin. She walked toward the black car, her stomach churning with a nauseous mix of fear and righteous frustration. The back door of the sedan opened. Zara braced herself for a confrontation with some enraged, bespoke-suited executive. But the man who emerged wasn't what she expected. He unfolded himself from the car with a liquid grace that seemed to defy the chaos of the storm. He was tall, dressed in a suit so dark it seemed to drink the meager light, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He held no umbrella, letting the rain slick back his jet-black hair and trace paths down the sharp planes of his face. He looked at the minor dent on his bumper, then at the crumpled hood of her Toyota. His expression was unreadable, a mask of aristocratic calm. Then his eyes lifted and met hers. And the world stopped. For Minjun, the jolt of the impact had been a minor annoyance, a disruption to the sterile flow of his evening. He had been reviewing acquisition reports, his mind a cold calculator of risk and profit. Che-ho, in the driver's seat, had already been speaking into his comms unit, handling the situation with his usual ruthless efficiency. Minjun hadn't planned on getting out. It was beneath him. It was what he paid people for. But then he saw her. She got out of her rust bucket of a car, a warrior stepping onto a battlefield she knew she was going to lose. The rain plastered her cheap scrubs to her frame, but she stood tall. Her eyes, wide and dark, were a vortex of exhaustion, fear, and a stunning, defiant fire that seemed to burn away the gray misery of the storm. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, not in the way of the women who typically moved through his world, all polished surfaces and calculated smiles. She was something else entirely. She was real. Time ceased to be a linear concept. It became a single, frozen moment centered entirely on her. The noise of the city, the hammering rain, the voice of Jeho in his ear. It all faded into a dull, distant hum. There was only the woman standing before him, looking like she was ready to take on the world with nothing but sheer force of will. He felt a jolt, something far more profound than the collision of metal. It was a recognition, a deep, primal pull in his soul toward a person he had never met. It was absurd. It was impossible, and it was the truest thing he had ever felt. He opened his door and stepped out into the rain. He watched her approach, her jaw set. He saw the slight tremor in her hands and the faint discoloration blooming on her forehead, or she must have hit the steering wheel. A wave of protectiveness, fierce and unfamiliar, washed over him. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rougher than he intended, cutting through the sound of the downpour. Zara flinched, startled by the sound. She had been preparing her speech, a mix of apology and a plea for mercy. I'm fine. Look, I am so sorry. My tires, the car just slid. I have insurance. It's not great, but it's something." She was babbling, the words tumbling out of her in a nervous rush. Minjun took a step closer. He could smell the antiseptic scent of the hospital clinging to her, mingled with the fresh scent of rain. "You are bleeding." He gestured to a small cut on her temple she hadn't even noticed. She instinctively raised a hand to her head, her fingers coming away with a smear of blood. "It's just a scratch." "Let me see." It was not a request. He reached out, his fingers gently tilting her chin up. His touch was surprisingly warm against her cold skin. His proximity was overwhelming. He was all sharp angles and quiet intensity, and his eyes, dark and fathomless, were dissecting her, seeing far more than she was comfortable with. She felt a strange shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm a nurse," she said, pulling back slightly, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I can take care of a scratch." Jae-ho appeared at Min-jun's side, holding an umbrella that he pointedly ignored. "Sir, the arrangements are made. The car will be dealt with." Min-jun's gaze never left Zara's face. "Forget the car. Get her information." Zara's heart sank. Here it was, the lawsuit. "My information? I told you I have insurance." "Not for the car," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I am taking you to a hospital." She stared at him, bewildered. "What? No, I just came from a hospital. I work there. I'm fine, really." "You were in a collision. You have a head injury. You will be examined by a doctor." He spoke with an unnerving certainty, as if her compliance was a foregone conclusion. This was getting weird. The initial fear was being replaced by a sharp, prickly suspicion. "Look, Mr. Kwan," he supplied. "Mr. Kwan, I appreciate the concern, but this is a lot. You don't need to do this. We can just exchange information and let the insurance companies handle it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting, dangerous thing. "I do not use insurance companies, and I am not concerned. I am insisting." He turned to Jae-ho. "Take her car keys. Have the vehicle towed to our garage. It will be repaired and replaced with a loaner in the morning." "Sir," Jae-ho confirmed with a slight bow. Zara's head was spinning. Repaired? A loaner? Who was this guy? "Wait, hold on. You can't just take my car. This is creepy. Is this even legal?" His dark eyes held hers, a flicker of something she couldn't name. Amusement? Possession in their depths. "It is now. Get in my car, Miss Adebayo. Zara Adebayo." The name left her lips before she could stop it. "Get in the car, Zara Adebayo," he repeated, his voice softer now, a low murmur that sent another strange shiver through her. "You are getting soaked. You will catch a cold." She was caught in the force of his will, a current too strong to fight. Part of her was screaming to run, to call the police, to do anything other than obey this strange, impossibly compelling man. But another part, the exhausted, overwhelmed part that was tired of fighting every single day, was tempted to just let go, to let someone else take control just for a moment. Before she could protest further, he had a hand on her lower back, a firm, guiding pressure that propelled her toward the open door of the sedan. The interior was a cocoon of silent, leather-scented luxury. As she slid onto the plush seat, he followed her in, the door closing with a solid, definitive thud that shut out the storm and, it felt, the rest of the world. She sat stiffly on one side of the cavernous back seat, while he sat on the other, the space between them charged with a tense, vibrating energy. She could feel the heat radiating from him, see the water dripping from the ends of his hair onto the collar of his perfect suit. He wasn't looking at her, but she felt his awareness of her like a physical touch. This was insane. She had crashed her car into a Korean Mafia boss. The thought, wild and melodramatic, popped into her head, and she almost laughed. He didn't look like a gangster from the movies. He looked like something older, more powerful. A king. "Where do you live?" he asked, his voice pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. "You said you were taking me to a hospital." "I will have my personal physician meet us at your home," he stated calmly. "It will be more comfortable for you." Her alarm bells, which had been ringing, were now screaming. "Your personal physician? Absolutely not! I don't know you. I am not letting a strange man and his strange doctor into my apartment." He finally turned his head to look at her fully. The intensity in his gaze was like a physical weight. "You know my name. And you will be seen by a doctor. This is not a negotiation. Zara crossed her arms, a futile gesture of defiance. You're used to getting your own way, aren't you? Always, he confirmed, without a hint of arrogance. It was simply a fact. She let out a short, sarcastic laugh. Well, congratulations. You've met the exception. For the first time, a genuine smile broke through his stoic facade. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less dangerous, and infinitely more devastating. The smile was a punch to the chest. It stole the air from her lungs. I do not think so, he said, the smile lingering in his eyes. I think I have met the new rule. The days that followed were a surreal blend of intrusion and care. Minjun was true to his word. A sleek new rental car, far too fancy for her neighborhood, was delivered the next morning. When she called the garage her car had been towed to, a mechanic informed her respectfully that Mr. Kwan was personally covering the extensive repairs. Then, the deliveries started. First, it was groceries. Not just staples, but bags of gourmet food, fresh produce, and cuts of meat she could never afford, all from the most expensive market in the city. Then came a new set of high-end, all-weather tires, delivered with a note that simply said, "For your safety." Her roommate and fellow nurse, Maya, was agog. Who is this guy? A secret billionaire? A prince? Did you hit a fairy godfather with your car? More like a crime lord, Zara muttered, examining a box of imported Belgian chocolates with deep suspicion. This is not normal, Maya. It's invasive. It's amazing, Maya countered, popping a chocolate into her mouth. A rich, handsome guy is obsessed with you after you crash into him? That's not a crime drama. That's a romance novel. You have to see him again. Zara had no intention of seeing him again. But Minjun Kwan was not a man who waited for an invitation. A few days later, she was leaving the hospital after another draining shift when she saw him. He was leaning against the side of his black sedan, parked across the street. He wasn't looking at his phone or scanning the crowd. He was just watching the hospital entrance, waiting. For her. A cold knot of dread and an unwelcome flutter of excitement formed in her stomach. She marched across the street, her keys clutched in her hand like a weapon. What are you doing here? He straightened up as she approached. In the harsh fluorescent light of the street lamps, he looked even more imposing than she remembered. I came to see you. This is stalking, she said bluntly. The groceries, the tires, now this? It's creepy and you need to stop. He seemed unfazed by her accusation. The food was because I assumed you were too tired to shop after your shifts. The tires were because yours were unsafe. And I am here because I wanted to ask you to dinner. His logic was maddeningly simple, cutting through her indignation. He wasn't being menacing, he was being practical, in a wildly extravagant way. I'm not going to dinner with you, she said, her voice firm. Why not? Because I don't know you. Because normal people exchange insurance details. They don't start a private concierge service for the person who hit their car. I am not a normal person, he said, the statement hanging in the air between them. And I do not want to be normal with you. I want to have dinner. There was a raw honesty in his eyes, a loneliness that resonated with a hidden part of her own. She saw past the power and the wealth to the man beneath, a man who seemed as isolated as he was commanding. It disarmed her. The caregiver in her, the part that responded to pain, stirred in sympathy. One dinner, she heard herself say, horrified and thrilled at her own capitulation. That's it, and you stop the weird stalkery deliveries. The corner of his mouth lifted in that devastating half-smile. Agreed. The restaurant wasn't just exclusive, it was empty. Minjun had booked the entire place. A small round table for two sat in the center of a vast, opulent room, a single island in a sea of white linen. Zara, in her nicest but still not fancy enough dress, felt like an imposter. "You bought out the whole restaurant?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "I wanted to be able to talk to you without interruption," he explained, pulling out her chair. The gesture was so smoothly courteous, it felt alien. The men she knew didn't do that. The contrast between his world and hers was a physical chasm between them. He wore his power and wealth as easily as his suit, while she felt like she was constantly struggling to keep her head above water. But as they talked, the chasm began to shrink. He asked her about her work, about the challenges and the triumphs. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He didn't talk much about himself, speaking in vague terms about his family's global import-export business. But she learned other things. She learned he had a dry, self-deprecating sense of humor. She learned he felt the burden of his family's legacy as a heavy weight. And she saw, in the unguarded moments, a profound loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. He, in turn, was utterly captivated. She spoke about her patients with a fierce compassion that humbled him. She described the daily grind of her life not with self-pity, but with a resilient, sarcastic wit that he found intoxicating. She was a pillar of strength, a beacon of light, and he felt an overwhelming urge to shield that light from the harsh winds of the world, to make her life easier, to give her the peace she so clearly deserved. He was falling, and he had no desire to stop the descent. As he drove her home, the silence in the car was no longer tense, but comfortable. "Why me?" she asked quietly, as they pulled up to her apartment building. He turned off the engine and faced her. The dim light from the dashboard cast his face in shadows and angles. "When I saw you standing in the rain," he began, his voice low and serious, "I felt a sense of recognition, as if I had been waiting for you, and you had finally arrived." Her breath hitched. His words were so direct, so poetic, they bypassed all her defenses and struck something deep inside her. "That's crazy." "Is it?" he asked, his gaze searching hers. "Or is it the only thing that has ever made sense?" He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. When his lips met hers, the kiss was not demanding or possessive. It was a question, a plea. It was gentle and searching and filled with a longing that she felt echoed in her own soul. She responded instinctively, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, the carefully constructed walls around her heart crumbling into dust. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. "This is a bad idea," she whispered, her voice shaky. "It is the best idea I have ever had," he countered, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Let me see you again, Zara." "Tomorrow." The word was a promise and a prayer, and so, against her better judgment, she said, "Okay." Their world became a bubble, a fragile sphere containing just the two of them. Minjun was a constant, steady presence in her life. He never overwhelmed her with gifts again, but his care was evident in 1,000 smaller ways. He'd have food waiting for her after a long shift. He'd listen for hours as she vented about her day. He remembered small details, the name of a difficult patient, her mother's favorite type of tea. He brought a sense of safety and stability she had never known. For the first time in years, Zara felt like she could breathe. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She fell in love with him not in a sudden rush, but in a slow, steady tide. She fell for the quiet way he watched her, as if she were a masterpiece. She fell for the gentleness of his hands, which could be so strong and yet so tender. She fell for the lonely boy she sometimes saw hiding behind the powerful man, but shadows from his world constantly threatened to pierce their bubble. Phone calls would come in at all hours, his voice dropping to a low, cold monotone as he issued orders in Korean. Meetings with grim-faced men in dark suits would sometimes interrupt their dates, men who looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Cheho was always there, a silent, watchful specter in the background, his presence a constant reminder that Minjun's life was more complicated than import-export. The most significant shadow was cast by his uncle, a man she met only once. Mr. Kwan Sr. was a relic from an older, colder world. He had eyes like chips of ice and a smile that never reached them. He looked at Zara as if she were a piece of dirt on his nephew's pristine suit, an unfortunate, temporary stain. "An interesting choice, Minjun," the old man had said in heavily accented English, his gaze sweeping over Zara with undisguised contempt. "A distraction." The family has certain expectations, a certain purity of lineage. Minjun's hand had tightened on hers, his body going rigid with a controlled fury she had never seen before. "Zara is not a distraction," he'd said, his voice dangerously soft. "She is my future, and you will show her respect." The uncle had simply smiled his cold smile and retreated, but the threat lingered in the air, a poisonous vapor. Zara felt a chill deep in her bones. This was not just a disapproving relative. This was something far more menacing. The bubble finally burst on a Tuesday night. They were walking back to his car after seeing a movie, their hands linked, laughing about a ridiculous scene. It was a perfect, normal moment. And then the world exploded in violence. A black van screeched to a halt beside them. Two men in masks jumped out, one brandishing a pipe. Zara barely had time to register what was happening before Minjun moved. He became a different person. The gentle lover vanished, replaced by a deadly, efficient fighter. He shoved her behind him, shielding her with his body, and met the attackers with a brutal grace that was terrifying to behold. It was over in seconds. Jae-ho materialized from the shadows, a pistol appearing in his hand as if by magic. The attackers, seeing him, scrambled back into their van and sped off into the night. Minjun stood panting, his knuckles bloody, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. He turned to her, his face a mask of concern. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" Zara couldn't speak. She was frozen, her mind replaying the sickening crunch of the pipe against his arm, the swift, precise violence of his response. She stared at him, at the man she loved, and for the first time, she was truly afraid of him. This was his world. Not import-export. This was blood and violence and men in masks. He saw the fear in her eyes, and something inside him broke. The mask of the king shattered, revealing the desperate man beneath. "Zara!" She shook her head, taking a step back. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question a shard of ice in her throat. He took her back to his penthouse, the silence in the car a heavy shroud. In the sterile, empty space of his home, with the city lights glittering mockingly below, he finally told her, "This is who I am, Zara," he finished, his voice raw. He stood across the room from her, not daring to come closer, as if he feared his own darkness would contaminate her. "This is the world I rule, the poison I inherited." Zara listened, and with every word she felt her heart breaking. It wasn't the violence that horrified her most. It was the chasm that had just opened between them, a gulf so wide she didn't know if it could ever be crossed. She was a healer. Her entire life was dedicated to mending what was broken, to easing pain. His life, his empire, was built on creating it. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. She loved him. God, she loved him with an ache so profound it felt like it was tearing her apart. But love couldn't change this. It couldn't make this right. "I can't," she whispered, the words tasting like grief. "I can't be a part of this. My whole life, I try to help people. I can't be with someone whose world is built on hurting them." His face, which had been a stoic mask, crumpled. The pain in his eyes was a physical thing, a deep, soul-crushing agony that made her want to run to him, to hold him, to tell him it would be okay. But it wouldn't be. "I know," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I never should have brought you into this. I was selfish. I saw your light and I wanted it for myself, even if it meant dragging you into my darkness." She shook her head, sobbing openly now. "It's not your fault. I fell in love with you." "Then let me protect you," he pleaded, taking a step toward her. "I can keep you safe. I can build a wall around you so thick this world will never touch you." "It's already touched me, Minjun," she said, her voice breaking. "It's in you. It's the foundation of everything you have. I can't live in a castle built on the pain of others. It would destroy me, and it would destroy the woman you fell in love with." He stopped, knowing she was right. To ask her to stay would be to ask her to compromise her very soul, the essence of who she was. And he loved her too much to do that. This was the price of his kingdom. Her. She walked toward the door, every step an act of sheer will. Her hand was on the handle when she turned back to look at him one last time. He stood alone in the middle of the vast, empty room, a solitary king in a gilded cage, his face a portrait of utter devastation. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied, the words a death sentence. And then she was gone. The door closed with a soft click, and Minjun Quan was left alone with the silence, the predator returning to feast on the ruins of his heart. The first month was a blur of numb survival. Zara moved to a new city, got a new job at a small community hospital, and found a tiny apartment that was clean and safe and crushingly lonely. She threw herself into her work, taking every extra shift she could, seeking refuge in the structured chaos of the emergency room. She worked until her body ached, and her mind was too numb to think. But in the quiet moments, in the dead of night, when the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, he would come for her. His memory was a ghost that haunted her new life. She would see a man in a dark suit, and her heart would leap into her throat. She'd hear a low, rumbling laugh in a coffee shop and spin around, expecting to see his face. She missed the little things most. The way he'd trace the lines on her palm, the quiet intensity of his gaze when she talked, the feeling of his hand at the small of her back, a silent promise of protection. She had made the right choice. She knew she had. It was a truth she clung to, like a life raft in a stormy sea. Her principles were intact. She was safe. She was free. So why did this freedom feel so much like a prison sentence? Her mother, with whom she now spoke on the phone every night, could hear the hollowness in her voice. "You did the right thing, my love," her mother would say, her voice a soothing balm. "That life, it was not for you. You have a good heart, Zara. Don't let anyone tarnish it." "I know, Mama, I know," Zara would reply, staring out her window at a city that wasn't hers, a life that didn't feel real. But knowing you were right and feeling right were two very different things. Her heart was a gaping wound that refused to heal. She was incomplete, a puzzle with the crucial piece missing. And she knew, with a devastating certainty, that the missing piece was ruling a dark kingdom in a city she could never return to. For Minjun, life without Zara was a descent into a gray, colorless hell. He was functioning, but he was not living. He ran his empire with a new, terrifying ruthlessness. He crushed the rival faction that had dared to attack them, a move orchestrated by his uncle to test his resolve. He dismantled his uncle's power base with surgical precision, exiling the old man from the organization and the city. He solidified his rule, becoming more powerful, more feared than ever before. But every victory was hollow. He would return to his silent penthouse, the ghost of her laughter echoing in the empty rooms. He'd stand by the window and look out at the city he owned, and feel nothing but a profound, aching emptiness. This was the empire he had chosen over her. It felt like a pile of dust. Jae-ho watched his boss with a growing sense of alarm. The fire in Min-jun had been replaced by ice. He was a machine, making cold, calculated decisions, his humanity locked away in a part of himself that had died the night Zara left. One evening, Jae-ho entered the office to find Min-jun staring at the picture on his phone, the same way he had been doing for months. "This is no way to live, Hyung," Jae-ho said quietly, using the familiar brotherly term for the first time in years. Min-jun didn't look up. "It is the life I have." "You could have another," Jae-ho pressed. "The organization is stable, more than stable. It runs itself, but it is killing you." "It is all I have," Min-jun repeated, his voice devoid of life. "No," Jae-ho said, his voice firm. "It is all you think you have. You let her go because your world was too dangerous for her. What if you changed the world?" Min-jun finally looked up, a flicker of something, not hope, but perhaps curiosity in his dead eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying the Golden Dragon Syndicate is a legacy of blood and fear. It is a cage. You have the power to tear it down, to build something new, something clean, something she could be a part of." The idea was insane, impossible. The syndicate was a hydra. To cut off one head meant two more would grow in its place. To dismantle it would be to declare war on every dark corner of the city, to make enemies of men who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. It would mean risking everything: his power, his wealth, his life. He looked down at the smiling face on his phone. He thought of her integrity, her light. He thought of the life he was living, a slow death in a gilded tomb, risking everything to get her back. It was the first thing that had made sense in 6 miserable months. A new fire lit in Min-jun's eyes, not the cold fire of a king, but the hot, determined flame of a man with a purpose. "Tell me your plan," he said to Jae-ho. The process was a war fought not on the streets, but in boardrooms and back alleys. It was brutal, dangerous, and required every ounce of Min-jun's cunning and ruthlessness. He began to systematically and quietly liquidate the syndicate's criminal assets. The loan sharking operations were sold off to rivals, the smuggling routes severed, the protection rackets dissolved. With every asset he sold, he made a new enemy. Threats were constant, attempts were made on his life, but he moved with the unwavering focus of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. He took the vast, illicit fortune he had amassed and began to pour it into legitimate enterprises. He invested in tech startups, real estate, and global logistics. He hired teams of lawyers and financial analysts to scrub every dollar clean, to build a new empire on a foundation of law and commerce, not fear. He was using the weapons of his dark past to build a brighter future. Jae-ho was by his side through it all, his loyalty absolute. He was Min-jun's shield, his strategist, his conscience. It took nearly a year of living on the edge, of sleeping with a gun by his bed, of watching his old world burn to the ground so a new one could rise from the ashes. Finally, it was done. The Golden Dragon Syndicate was a ghost, a legend whispered in the underworld. In its place stood Kwon Global, a legitimate, powerful, and respected international corporation. Min-jun was no longer a kingpin. He was a CEO. He still had power, still had wealth, but it was a different kind. It was clean. He stood in the same penthouse office, but it felt different. The light seemed to reach further into the corners. The silence was no longer a predator. It was just peace. He had changed his world. Now he had to see if she would be a part of it. He didn't send a car or a messenger. He drove himself, taking a simple, unremarkable car 12 hours to the sleepy city she now called home. He found her hospital, a small, unassuming brick building, and he waited. When Zara finished her shift, she was walking toward her car, tired but content. The ache for him was still there, a dull, constant companion, but she had built a life, a quiet life, a good life. Then she saw him. He was leaning against a car across the street, just as he had been all those months ago. But he was different. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, not a suit. The hard, dangerous edges around him seemed to have softened. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, hopeful calm. Her feet stopped moving. Her heart forgot how to beat. It couldn't be. He saw her and pushed himself off the car, crossing the street toward her. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "Minjun?" she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello, Zara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "I'm not that man anymore," he said, cutting straight to the heart of it. "The syndicate is gone. I ended it. It's all gone. I run a legitimate company now. It's all clean." She stared at him, trying to process his words. It sounded impossible, a fairy tale. Why?" A small, sad smile touched his lips. "Because you were right. I couldn't live in that castle anymore, not without you. So I tore it down. I did it for me, Zara. I needed to become a man who was worthy of the memory of you. I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to know." She saw the truth of it in his eyes, the immense sacrifice, the incredible risk he had taken. He hadn't just changed his business, he had changed his soul. He had done the impossible, for her. The love she had tried so hard to bury, to starve, to forget, erupted inside her, a tidal wave of emotion so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. The quiet, good life she had built felt gray and empty compared to the vibrant, terrifying, all-consuming love she felt for this man. She closed the distance between them in 3 short steps. Her hands came up to frame his face, her thumbs tracing the lines of his jaw, as if to be sure he was real. He was. "You're an idiot," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I know," he whispered back, his own eyes shining, and then she kissed him. It was not a gentle, questioning kiss like their first one. This was a kiss of desperation and relief, of reunion and homecoming. It was the closing of a chasm, the mending of a wound. It was all the lonely nights and heartbroken days poured into one perfect, soul-shattering moment. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet, holding her as if he would never let her go again. And he wouldn't. They had found their way back, not by ignoring the darkness, but by creating a new light, together. 2 years later, the Zara Adebayo Community Clinic opened its doors in the heart of the city's most underserved neighborhood. It was a bright, clean, modern facility, offering free and low-cost healthcare to anyone who walked through the door. It was Zara's dream, brought to life by a grant from the Kwan Global Foundation. She stood at the entrance, watching families come and go, her heart full. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. "Look at what you built," Minjun murmured in her ear. She leaned back against his chest, covering his hands with her own. "What we built," she corrected softly. Their life was a quiet miracle. He ran his global empire from an office just a few blocks away, and every day at 5, he came to her clinic to walk her home. They had a house with a small garden, a life filled with a peaceful, profound happiness that neither of them had ever thought possible. He had redeemed himself, not just with grand gestures, but with the quiet, daily devotion of being a good man. He had found his humanity in her love, and she had found her safe harbor in his. He turned her around to face him, his eyes, once so full of shadows, now clear and bright, and filled with an endless adoration for her. "I love you, Zara Adebayo." "I love you too, Minjun Kwan," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. They had crashed into each other's lives, a collision of two different worlds. But from the wreckage, they had built something beautiful and new, something strong enough to last forever. This story is a reminder that love's true power lies not in accepting darkness, but in inspiring the strength to seek the light. It teaches us that redemption is possible, and that a person willing to dismantle their entire world for the sake of another is a person who has found the truest purpose of all. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more tales of love and redemption, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. What did you think of Minjun's decision to completely change his life? Was it the only way he could truly be with Zara? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, we want you to choose. Should we explore the story of Cheho, the loyal second-in-command, as he finds an unexpected love of his own? Or would you rather hear about Zara's friend Maya and her whirlwind romance with a mysterious doctor? Vote in the poll and tell us what you'd like to see next.